going to do is a couple weeks ago, I did a lesson called Becoming Moses. And we talked about the life of Moses, and we'll get into it here in a minute. But I wasn't really finished. When I got done, I kind of ran out of time. And I wrapped up what I was talking about and stuff, but I was like, I've got more that I need to say about Moses and his life. So we have now turned it into a little mini-series, and we're going to start the second part today. But for those of you that need a refreshment, or maybe you weren't here a couple weeks ago whenever I did this, what we did was we talked about Moses from his birth on up until his encounter at Mount Sinai. And we talked about everything that was going on in his life up until that point. But his encounter with God on the mountain is kind of where we stopped. That's where we stopped and ended part one of this little series. And there on the mountain, we talked about how Moses was extremely resistant to God. If y'all remember, I used an illustration with a resistant cord and stuff. And we talked about how he was just very, very resistant to God. And God was calling him to do this amazing thing and this great plan. And Moses just was completely resistant. He was like, no, God. He was like, surely there's somebody else you can use. Surely, you can find somebody else. I'm not the one. There's got to be somebody else. I'm too old. He's coming up with all these excuses. I'm too old. I stutter. I've done bad things. He's coming up with all these excuses. And God's saying, I'm calling you to do it. So let's go. I'm going to find ways to use you. And that was the whole point of the first part, was that God's calling us, and we need to quit resisting. God's calling us to do something. I don't know what it is in your life, but God's calling you to do something. And we need to quit resisting it. We need to give it to God and say, okay, whatever it is, I know it's going to be hard, but whatever it is, let's go, God, I'm ready. And so this whole little mini-series is going to be about the journey of Moses, and because we know Moses is this great man, right? But what I want to do is, it's called Becoming Moses. So we're going to take this journey and talk about everything he had to do in order to get to where we can now consider him the great man that he is. Because it was not easy for him. It was a bumpy road. There was a lot that went on in his life before he became this amazing man that did all these incredible things. So with that being said, we're going to continue on our journey today, and we're going to talk about Moses. And before we get into the real meat of what I want to talk about today, we are going to kind of go back just a tad. We're going to kind of look back at the whole lifespan of Moses. And so you go, Boone, that's a lot. He was a pretty old man. Yeah, he lived quite some time. But the cool thing about Moses' life is you can really break it down into 3 segments. And they were all about 40 years. Now you can break these segments down into. And so the first 40 years, this first segment of his life, he was in Egypt. And here in Egypt, this is where we saw him kill the Egyptian. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to go back and read the verses. And so we find that in Exodus chapter 2, verse 12 through 14. And in verse 12 it says, after looking in all directions to make sure no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian, and he hid the body in the sand. And then the next day, when Moses went out to visit his people again, he saw 2 Hebrew men fighting. Why are you beating up your friend? Moses said to the one who started the fight. And the man replies with, who appointed you to be our prince and our judge? Are you going to kill me as you killed that Egyptian yesterday? So like I said, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but Moses is kind of having like this crazy freak out moment because he's like, oh my goodness, I thought I was doing something good. because I saw this, Egyptian that was beating up my fellow man. He gets mad and he's angry. And Moses, if you don't know, had a real bad problem with his temper. He couldn't control his anger very well. And so he takes it upon himself to go and take care of this guy. And then he finds out, he's like, whenever this guy says, who are you to, tell us what to do? Whenever you just went out and did something horrible, are you going to kill me like you killed that other guy yesterday? And so Moses starts, going crazy, and he's like, all these thoughts start popping up in his head. And he's like, well, what if the Egyptians find out? What if Pharaoh finds out? They're going to kill me. And that actually ends up happening. They find out, and Pharaoh, sends his men to try and find Moses. And so Moses ends up escaping to the land of Midian. And we'll get to that in just a second. But the thing that I want you to learn from this first 40 years, this first segment of Moses' life where he's here in Egypt, is that we all have to wait on God's timing. Moses didn't wait on God's timing. He was wanting to take control right then and there. He was wanting to, he saw what was happening to his fellow man, and he was like, this needs to be handled. Somebody needs to do something about this. And he was like, so I guess I'll do it. And so he goes out and he kills this man. And then he realizes, okay, that was not the right thing to do. Killing somebody is not the right thing to do. And so he freaks out and he escapes on into Midian. But I need y'all to get this, is we've got to wait on God's timing. I know it's not fun. I know that sometimes it can be really hard, but whatever it is that's going on in your life, you've got to wait on God's timing. You got to wait on Him. Because He's got something amazing in store for you. I don't know what it is. Like I said, you may be going through a lot of stuff. I don't know what your problems are, but we got to wait on God's timing. We can't take it over ourselves. Even though we really want to, we have to wait on God's timing. So that's what we can learn from the first segment of his life. So the second segment, like I said, he's in the land of Midian. So these next 40 years, he's in the land of Midian. And last time we talked about, we just kind of cruised over it. But what happens in the land of Midian is he's just escaped. He's sitting at a well. And there's some girls that come up, and they're shepherd girls. They have flocks of sheep. And so they come up, and they're drawing water from the well. Well, another group of shepherd men start attacking these ladies and their sheep and trying to get their sheep. And Moses sees all this unfolding. So Moses steps in and he takes care of everything. And the men end up leaving, and he's saved these girls, and he draws water for their sheep. And they go home and they tell their father about it. Well, their father, his name is Jethro. Jethro is the priest of the land of the Midian. And so he's like, well, this is awesome that this guy did this for you. We need to have a celebration. He said, go get this man, go find him, and we're going to have him for dinner. And so what happens is they go and they get him. And then he ends up marrying, Moses ends up marrying one of Jethro's daughter. He ends up having 2 kids with her. He ends up serving under Jethro. He ends up working. And so, like I said, the Bible doesn't really say a whole lot about this, and we kind of cruised past it last time because there's not a whole lot about this segment of Moses' life. But what I want y'all to get, and what I want y'all to learn from this segment of his life, is that Moses wasn't idle during this point in time. He wasn't just sitting around on the couch eating Cheetos watching Grey's Anatomy. He was working. He was working his tail off. He was out learning how to tend to the flocks. He was out there working for Jethro. He was doing all of this stuff. He was supporting his family. He was loving his family. He was a loving father. He was a loving husband. And he's out there and he's working his tail off for 40 years, y'all. He's just going through what we would call the motions, this everyday life. And he's just going and he's going. But what I want y'all to learn is that in this time, Moses is present. Moses is doing what he's supposed to be doing. Because he very well could have just said, you know what, I want to just escape from the Egyptians. I just want to hide out and hide in this little bunker and, stay away from everything. But no, he's being present, and he's working, and he's supporting his family. And the thing is God wanted to use Moses. God wanted to use Moses. Moses wanted to save these people, and so did God. And he wanted to use Moses to do it. But the problem was, Moses wasn't ready. And it's obvious in that first segment of his life whenever he kills that Egyptian. So Moses needs some maturing. And that's what he's doing here in the second segment. But he's not being idle. And so that's what I want you to learn, is that while you're waiting on God's timing, don't be idle. Don't just sit around and do nothing. Because these little medial tasks that you think is, your day in, day out, going to your job, loving your family, supporting people, that's not medial stuff. That's big stuff. In the grand scheme of things, that's big stuff. I know it may seem small to you. It may look like a small little thing, but it's not. And y'all, we spend a lot of our time looking for these mountaintop experiences. And Moses had a literal mountaintop experience whenever he was up on Mount Sinai and he had God speak to him in the bush. But we're always searching for these experiences. But what I need you to learn and to gather is that, y'all, these mountaintop experiences are only a small, teeny tiny portion of your life. The rest of your life, unfortunately, is going to be spent in the valley, going through the work, having to do whatever it is that God's called you to do. And so you need to become like Moses and mature in that way, where when you're waiting on God's timing, you're not just sitting around blaming God and going, God, where are you? I'm ready for you. I'm ready for you to fix this. I'm ready for you to use me. I'm ready, for, whatever it is. Instead, keep on pushing, keep on going, and don't be idle in that moment while you're waiting on God. Am I making sense? Amen. All right. So then we come to the third segment of the life of Moses. And this is where we're going to kind of camp out and hang out today. And this segment of his life is the one that we're the most familiar with because it's the most chronicled in the Bible. It's what the Bible tells us about. It's where he performs all his, amazing, incredible things. It's where he, splits the Red Sea. It's where he leads the Israelites away from the Egyptians. It's where the Ten Commandments happen. It's, where all this incredible stuff that we know Moses from, it happens from this third segment in his life. And, but what I really want to talk about and what I really want to harp on today is leadership and Moses' leadership qualities, because this is where he steps into this humongous leadership role that God asked him to step into at Mount Sinai that we talked about, that he kept resisting and kept pulling away from. And so we are going to talk about types of leaders. And I've taken some leadership classes, some leadership and communication classes back in college. I went to, there's a thing that you can do here in Hot Spring County called the Hot Spring County Leadership Forum. I've done all kinds of stuff with leadership. And I know there's lots and lots of forms of leaders. But in my mind, it really boils down to two types of leaders. And the first type is good leaders. Good leaders. And I'm about to bring up an example in a person, and I want y'all to hang in there with me and not judge me as soon as I say this person's name, because as soon as I do, y'all are going to flip out. So hang in with me. But I believe that and like I said, this statement, don't take it out of context. Let me explain myself. I believe that one of the best leaders of all time is Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler. One of the best leaders of all times. I loved studying Adolf Hitler and really what he was about. Because the thing that a lot of people maybe forget or they never even realize in the first place is this man, usually whenever you have a dictator, usually they take over, right? They like overthrow the government. This man didn't. Adolf Hitler was elected into his leadership role. The people loved him. He was elected into it. They thought he was good enough leader that they elected him into his leadership role. So obviously he had to be a good leader. And then he starts doing bad things and they continue to follow him. So he's a good leader. He was good at what he was doing. What he was doing was horrible, but he was good at what he was doing. So what I want y'all to get is you can have a good leader, you can be a good leader, but you can have horrible, terrible motives. You can have horrible, terrible morals, but you can still be a good leader. And so that brings me to the second type of leader, and the leader that we all should strive to be, and that's godly leaders. There's good leaders, and then there's godly leaders. And one of the more recent examples that I believe is a man that was a good, amazing, godly leader is Mr. Martin Luther King Jr. Because this man led this movement, and even though there may have been riots, there may have been craziness that happened around things he was doing, he wasn't a part of that. Everything he wanted to do was peaceful. He wanted to make sure that all of his followers were doing what they were doing in a peaceful way. He wanted to make sure that what he was doing was the right way to do it. It was the godly way to do it. If you go back and you look at his speeches, they've all got scriptures in them. He talks about praying. He talks about God all throughout all of his quotes and his speeches. He was a godly man and a godly leader. Amen. And so was Moses. Moses was an incredible godly leader as well. We saw him do all these incredible things. And, he had these people that were following him. And they were freaking out because, they had to leave everything. And they had to drop it and they had to trust this man because they didn't really know God. And so they had to trust this man that he was going to lead them out. And so something would come up and they would go, man, you should have just left us in the wilderness to die or let us get killed by the Egyptians. We would have been way better off just getting killed by them because now we're going to, starve to death or we don't have clean water. And so every time that something like that would happen, Moses would go to God and he'd pray. And God would say, okay, do this and I'm going to give you food or I'm going to give you clean water. And the people would go, oh, wow, your God really does exist. And they'd start realizing. Moses was a great, great leader. And y'all, that's what we need more of in this world. We need less good leaders and more godly leaders. And I'm not just talking about, like, in the political arena, our president or, whatever in government. Everywhere, we need godly people, godly leaders. Now, this whole becoming Moses thing is to show you that anybody can be a leader. Anybody can be a godly leader as long as you submit yourself to God. As long as you say, God, come into my life, be a part of my life, you can be a godly leader. It doesn't matter the mess-ups. You go, Boone, I've messed up so much. I've messed up so bad. Like, you can't even imagine how bad I've messed up. It doesn't matter. God can still use you. It doesn't matter what's been going on in your life. You go, Boone, I've got so much going on in my life. My life is messed up, dude. You don't even know. Hey, God can still use you. God wants you to be a godly leader. He wants you to be a leader for him. He wants to use you. Y'all, we need godly leaders bad. And like I said, it's not just when we think of leaders, we think of, being put in a leadership position, being put in somewhere in government or, boss of your job or, a pastoral role or whatever. We need leaders in our homes. We need leaders that are good husbands, that are good wives. Be a leader to your spouse. Be a leader to your kids. We need good parents. We need godly parents. Yes. Be a godly leader in your home. Be a godly leader in your neighborhood. Be a godly leader in your community. It doesn't have to happen in this big, you don't have to take over the nation or the world to be a godly leader. Do it right here. Do it for your family. Kids. I know we got the kids in here today. Be a godly leader. Be a godly son. Be a godly daughter. Be a godly brother. Be a godly sister. Be a godly leader in your school. When you walk up and down the hallways, make it to where people go, what in the world is going on with that kid? And you say, hey, I just love me some Jesus. Amen. I love God. Y'all, in your jobs, godly leaders in your jobs. And you go, Boone, I'm not the leader of anything. I'm not the boss. Y'all, just be Christ-like. And people will start watching you and following you. And you'll change people's lives. Just by the way you smile. Just by the way one word could even say, speak 1,000 words. Your actions. At your job, tomorrow, don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, God, it's Monday. Say, thank you, God, it's Monday. I got a job I get to go to. I get to provide for my family. Not everybody has that opportunity. So say, thank you, God, I get a job I get to go to. Y'all, godly leaders in the church. And I'm not just talking about like our leadership team. Y'all go out and pick up sticks and be happy about it. Take out the trash. We need leaders in the church. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Just do something. Help out. You don't have to lead a class. You don't have to lead a Bible study. You don't have to be on the worship team. You can be a godly leader just by going up and giving somebody a hug and smiling and saying, hey, I've been thinking about you and praying about you. Amen. Y'all, we need godly people and godly leaders. And it's not going to be easy, y'all. In fact, it's usually pretty hard. Because what happens is the devil starts throwing things at us. When we try to start being godly, the devil goes, all right, it's time for me to get in here and start roaring like a lion. I'm going to get after this person because they're being way too godly. I can't handle that. And so he starts coming after you, and he starts fighting you. And y'all, Moses, the thing about Moses was he still struggled with sin. Even when he was in his huge leadership position, he was doing all this incredible stuff that he was doing and all this stuff that God had called him to do. He still struggled with sin. He still struggled with the things of the past. And we can see that in chapter 16, verses 16 through 20 in Exodus. And so in verse 16, it starts off and it says, these are the Lord's instructions. Each household should gather as much as it needs. Pick up 2 quarts for each person in your tent. So this is what the people of Israel did. They did as they were told. They gathered a lot. Some only gathered a little. But when they measured it out, everyone had just enough. And those who gathered a lot had nothing left over. And those who gathered only a little had enough. Each family had just what it needed. So verse 19, Moses tells them, do not keep any of it until morning. But some of them didn't listen. The reason he told them that is because God told him to tell them that. But some of them didn't listen and kept some of it until morning. But by then it was full of maggots and had a terrible smell. And then Moses became very angry with them. Just like in the past. His sin came back up and he got really mad at him and he was really angry again. Y'all, it's going to happen, okay? This should be a lesson to us that we all can succumb to certain sin that may continue, and it may go on and continue to haunt us all of our days, but don't let it, because that's where God comes in. We have to be on constant alert. And when that thought pops up in your head, when that emotion pops in your head, when that urge pops up in your head, just stop whatever you're doing for a second and just say, God, help me. Come in, flood into my heart, flood into my thoughts. Give me thoughts of your love and your purity and everything that you are. And see what happens. Just see what happens. Because I guarantee you, your life will look completely different. If every time that sin starts to pop in your head, whatever it is, maybe it's an emotion, maybe it's a thought, maybe it's an addiction, whatever it is, and you go, oh geez, here it comes, and you know it's coming, and you feel some kind of weird tugging on your heart, that's the Holy Spirit. And you say, okay, it's time to step back a second and say, God, help me out with this. Give me your love. Give me your thoughts of love and purity and your emotions and everything that you are. Y'all, I went to the men's conference, I guess it was last week. There was a breakout session time, and we all went to different classes. And I went to this class called The Purpose Playbook. And what it was this guy, and he had written this book called The Purpose Playbook. And so he spends a whole hour talking about our purpose in life, and it was incredible, the things he said. I loved every second of it. I had never heard it said in that way. But the thing is when you hear a man or a woman speak about purpose in life, you usually think that, they're going to be a little bit older. This guy was 20 years old. He'd already written a book. He hadn't even finished college. He's like a sophomore in college. He's already written a book, and he's going all around the world telling people about how to find their purpose in God. At 20 years old. Y'all, it doesn't matter if you're 8 or if you're 88. God is calling you to be a leader for Him, to benefit His kingdom. He wants you right now to step up and to be a leader. And like I said, it may not be this huge mountaintop experience type leadership. It may just be being a leader in your home. It may just be being a leader in the community, at your job, here in the church, at school, wherever. But God is calling you to be a leader. He wants you right now to start fighting battles against the devil. And you go, Boone, I just don't know if I can do it. I don't know. There's so much going on, and maybe you're like Moses when we were talking about in the first part, and you're resisting God, and you're just like, I don't know. I don't know if I can do it. Y'all, give it to God and say, God, help me. Help me to be this man or woman of God that you want me to be. Help me to be this godly leader, this example for whoever it is that you want me to be an example for. Y'all, I was teaching the 5th and 6th grade class one time, and before I went over there to teach it, I had a mom come up to me, and she says, Boone, can I tell you a story? And I said, yeah, sure. And so she starts telling me the story. She goes, I was driving down the road the other day, and my kid was in the back seat, and she said, the kid said something, I don't remember the phrase or the sentence or whatever, but the kid said that something sucked. The kid said, oh, that sucks, or, whatever. And she said that she immediately, threw on the brakes and looked in the rearview mirror and said, where did you hear that? We don't say that in this household. And she said, well, Boone said it, and he's a pastor. And when she told me that, I was like, oh, snap. Because, in my mind, that wasn't a really bad word, but you got to realize that people are watching you. Whether you're in a big leadership role like I am or not, it doesn't matter. People are watching you. Your kids are watching you. Your friends are watching you. Since you call yourself a Christian, people are watching you. They're going to see what you do when times are good, but they're especially going to see what you do when times are bad. Whenever you're going through that huge valley, and it seems like it's never going to end, and you've got mountains and mountains to climb, they're going to watch you and say, hey, that doesn't seem like something, a Christian should be doing. That doesn't seem like, the way that person, is talking, that doesn't sound very Christian-like, whatever it is. People are watching you. And so we have to be godly leaders. Amen?